Down show. Is that it?
Yeah, do it. Go ahead and do it.
I'm Kyle Mills, and you're watching the Breaking Down show.
Yeah, man. The Break It Down show loves to have authors on the show. You are not the first number one New York Times bestseller, but you are in the club now, and I appreciate that. When when you start writing books, okay, it's a dream to get on the New York Times bestseller list. It's an impossible dream to get to the top, but you've done that. What do you tell the younger version of yourself that when you're like, hey, this is going to happen?
I never really expected any of it. I didn't grow up aspiring to be a writer. I kind of got into it by accident. And I never thought the book I wrote would get published. I certainly never thought it would be a success, and it was a little shocking. I wrote my first book, and um, I wrote it in 8 months. Very shortly thereafter, it hit the shelves, and it became a national bestseller. So I went from having never written fiction in my life, and over the course of maybe 18 months, becoming a national best-selling author, which was weird. I felt like a real imposter.
Do you still feel like an imposter?
No, after like 20 odd books, I actually feel like a writer now, but it's a strange thing if you think about, I would go do events and people would ask me about, writing and all this stuff. And I think, 18 months ago, I was reading how to write a novel for dummies, like
Yeah.
literally. So I don't think I should be giving anybody advice. Now I've thought about it for 20 years. I feel a little better about it.
But you bring up an important point. And when you get into this, you don't get into it. Okay, you dream about whatever success you're going to dream about, right? And maybe that is being a number one New York Times bestseller, and that is something that can happen. But when you go to a party, you're largely unknown. I mean, maybe they've seen your work, but when you write on the Vince under the Vince Flynn banner or the Robert Ludlum banner, your name is on the list of that front cover, but they may never even read that part of the thing. So like you can be anonymous and yet be this wonderfully successful person.
Yeah, it's I think the best way to do it. Whenever I'm around famous people, I find the reactions to them to be really weird.
Mm.
People are staring at them all the time or coming up and asking them for things and everything. It's very weird. So I love being a writer because yeah, when you're at an event or something, it's really fun to see the fans and everything. But yeah, nobody. I think one person in my entire life has ever like come up to me and said, "You're Kyle Mills, aren't you?" And it was the most like literally. I thought it was in my hometown too, and I thought it was. I thought he knew me from rock climbing or something like that.
Yeah,
And it's like, no, you're one of my favorite authors.
that's great. And the other day, and I put in the promo, like if you go to the grocery store in the book rack, good chance you're going to see one of your books there. I mean, I did. And you could literally be standing in front of your book. And they're like, who are you? You're like, I wrote this book, and they'd be like, no, you didn't.
Yeah,
They wouldn't believe it.
yeah,
You
no, nobody
don't
believed
prove it.
me. My picture's not even on the books of on the Flynn books.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I could never prove it. I'd have to pull out my driver's license or something.
Yeah. And then in your hometown, right? Like I get this a lot too. My friends will say, oh, are you doing that podcast thing still? And I'm like, yeah, it's my job. It's what I do for a living. It's granted not a big living, right? But it is this what I do and it's growing. And I have New York Times number one bestsellers on my show all the time. It's really incredible. And they're like, oh, good for you. Good for you. It's like,
No, it's worse if you're a writer though. I think because so I was a really big outdoor athlete, like skier and climber and stuff back in the day, and I was a writer, and people would ask my wife, "Oh, what does your husband do for a living?" And he'd say he's a writer, and they just roll their eyes because all these women were supporting the men in their lives who were mountain bike racers and rock climbers and stuff like that. So they all assumed that I had never been published and I just screwed around all day and like said I was writing a book and that she supported me. So she would have to say, no, he's been published. He has a bunch of books published. And so yeah, I was persona non grata. Nobody paid any attention to my career, and nobody really does. I definitely fly under the radar. I think even in my hometown.
when you go to a party, and this is another thing within this thing, he's like, when someone's like, oh, what do you do, Kyle? You're like, well, I'm a writer. Same thing, right? Like, do you say you're a writer? How do you couch it?
Yeah, I just say I'm a writer, and if they usually that just shuts down the conversation because again, they just think, you're unemployed and all that. And so, yeah, I just say I'm a writer, and if they ask what I write, I say novels, and usually that 90% of the time, that's the end of the conversation, and we move on to something else. So every once in a while, they'll say, "Well, what like what have you?" Because I think people don't want to ask because if they say, "Have you been published?" like it's judgmental. If you then have to say, well, no, but I've been working on it for 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think they just want to back away from that conversation, and I just leave it at that.
Yeah, it's there's a thing with this. There's certain jobs that are like that. Oh, I'm an actor, and then I because of what I do, and I'm like, okay, what level of actor are you? Are you leading projects? Are you a character actor? Are you just getting started? Any one of these things is fine, but where are you at? Like, do you make all of your money acting? But there's all these qualifications because it's like being a chef. Oh, I'm a chef. What kind of chef? Do you open restaurants?
Yeah, it's funny. I once was at a book conference, and I really hit it off with this woman who was a writer, and she'd written a book that I'd never read, and I kept saying to her, like, I reckon, do we know each other? And she's like, oh, maybe we met, at a book conference, blah 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 blah. Went out to dinner with her later, and she was an actress, and I had seen like stuff she'd been in, but like you don't put that together. But
Right.
she just shined me on the whole night until I finally figured it out.
Yeah, it's funny. And then with writing, there's so many different kinds of writers you can be. You can write for an online national level publication that gets you paid. You can write technical manuals. You can write fiction. You can write I mean, there's so many different things. And so when someone says that, that really should be the beginning of a conversation. Ooh, what do you write? I'm really interested in writing. But it never goes that way, does it?
No. I think again, it's just that judgmental thing that they're afraid you're going to say, "Oh, no, I've never been published or anything," and that they're going to be, it's going to make you feel bad or something, which it shouldn't. I mean, everybody who's ever been a writer has at one time been an unpublished writer.
Yeah.
So, like that's just a step you go through.
And the other thing, so I have one of these jobs, right? I mean, podcaster, same kind of thing where they're like, well, that's adorable. You're cute with your podcast, all kind of thing. And so I have a way of talking around that. That's boring. But I used to be a spy. And so when people say, oh, what do you do for a living? Like, oh, well, I'm a spy. I work in Iraq. I'd be like, come on. And I'm like, I mean, it's just true. I don't know what to tell you. And they're like, oh, you don't have to kill me. And I'm like, nope, I haven't told you anything classified. Won't tell you anything classified. But that is what I do, really. And then on the other side of that, my friends who are in the intelligence community or in the army, military kind of community will say, you're not a spy. And I'm like, aren't I though? I mean, if I get caught by the enemy, what are they going to call me? And are they going to be wrong? And they're like, they're going to call you a spy. I'm like, are they going to be wrong? No. And then so walks like a duck, So you have these two things where no one believes what I say when I say it. And I don't know, would you like me to lie to you? I can make something up. What would you like to do? And for a while, when I lived in Las Vegas, I was also, when I was home, I was a Captain Morgan model. And so literally no one ever believed what I said. They're like, nope, don't believe any of it. And I'm like, okay.
Now that's a good resume builder. Captain Morgan model. Yeah.
But what it is,
it's funny, a lot of the agency guys, I think, are sort of the same in that they, at a party, they don't want to roll that out because they think they have no idea how people are going to react to it. And I laugh because they're always say the same thing. They're like, I'm with the State Department.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so you're a former Navy SEAL and you work for the State Department.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm like, the State Department or the State Department?
Right.
But they don't. And my father was the same way growing. He was an FBI agent. We grew up, and I grew up in Oregon, which is very, very liberal. It was during kind of the hippie 70s. And he never wanted to like roll that out at a party because then everybody thought, oh, he's here for our weed or something. And he's like, I don't do that.
Don't care at all. Yeah, you're right. There is, it's easier just to say something else. And then the State Department, SOCOM, all these different agencies that go and do stuff kind of like what you write about. they have these ridiculous, and the Israelis are the best at it. You know, the Office of Affairs, or the Office of Practical Solutions, or something like that. You're like, what? That's so like an ODA, Operation Detachment Alpha, whatever. Like that doesn't mean anything. It's nothing. They're nothing words. And so when someone even describes it, like if you apply for a job in my field, it's as if nobody knows what anybody's doing. And so you look at it and you're like, that's not a job description. That's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo. You don't really know what you're going to go do. And then you get there and they often don't know what you're going to do, because you don't really find out until you get on the ground, And again, you write about this stuff. So this is my transition, but when you write about Jason Bourne, or, any of these characters that you get to write about, most everything is figured out in the moment that they're doing it. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. When I'm writing it, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like if you're thinking about, so you're doing like the latest book, everybody, by the way, is called Enemy at the Gates. It's a Vince Flynn novel, and Mitch Rapp is the is the character, right? And so when you write about these characters, there's a briefing. It's like, you have to go and do this impossible thing. We don't know how you'll do it, and you'll have to make up your resourcing along the way. I mean, it's the standard. That's why we love these books, because it's the man against the machine, and it's deadly. But do you ever just want to kind of change that formula and like, oh, here's, in the old episodes of Fall Guy, right? It was like the setup was always, oh, it's an easy one. It's an easy one, Colt. You're just going to go out and grab this guy. It's going to be so easy. And you're like, Jack, you always say that. And then it would not be easy. It would be impossible. But do you ever want to just kind of mess with the formula and just make it be straightforward, but impossible?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of that, because you think about this this series has gone on, I guess 20. This will be the 20th book in the series, so it follows the character Mitch from when he's in college to now he's in his mid 40s. He's the CIA's top operative, so there's a lot of water under the bridge there, and every one you want to mix up. You want to give him a new challenge. So that's what I do. I mean, with these books, not necessarily with the ones I've written under my own banner. But with these, it's always my first idea is, what challenge can I give Mitch that he's never had before? So, in this new one, he has a president that hates him, and he's always had presidents that liked and admired him before. In the other one, or in the previous one, he there was a giant blackout throughout the United States, so he had to operate in a completely different way without, any of the resources he normally counts on. So it's always that, how can I change it up and make it more interesting and maybe reverse things a little bit for every book, just because, I want them to stay fresh. I want them to feel fresh and interesting to fans. And I think most fans appreciate that. Truth be told, some fans just want, it to be straight up the same way it was before. But I think most fans appreciate the effort.
When you get the job of writing under the Vince Flynn banner, man, that's a pretty big deal. And right now, I guess one of the conversations that we're having as a society is gay Superman, right? But we all know that Superman's been turned into all kinds of things. We've explored crazy psycho Superman. We've deconstructed him and reconstructed him so many different ways. How tightly do you feel compelled? I mean, so much has changed in the genre over the last 20 years, right? So how tightly do you hold to the canon? Do you worry about canon? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. I mean, when I took this over, I read all the books. I had read most of them anyway, just as a fan, but over, many, many years. So I read them all again in order, took notes on everything, figured out Vince's style to the degree I could. I have notes on every character, every setting. And I've tried to very much stay true to that. Now, having said that, Mitch is 7 years older than when I took him over, and the world is really different. I mean, the world we see today, Vince wouldn't recognize, even though he only died, a fairly short time ago. So Mitch has had to evolve and take on new challenges. He has kind of a family now that he didn't have before. And, to look at the internal struggles within the United States as being a potential threat, and not just, terrorism, which is what he had primarily worked on before.
How much have you studied terrorism and counterterrorism? Is that like something you consider yourself to be an expert in now that you've written about it for a long time?
Yeah, I mean, I guess an expert, it might be too strong a word because I tend to become an expert in the precise thing I'm writing about.
Mhm.
It might be really esoteric. And then,
Yeah.
as time goes on, I don't necessarily keep up. Like if I write something about Hamas, I kind of become really an expert in Hamas. But then if I move on to like in the next one, if it was ISIS or something, then I sort of become an expert in that. And it changes so quickly. My knowledge doesn't necessarily, it doesn't keep up always. But that's one of the fun things about being a writer. You become an expert in weird stuff. Like I read a book on the tobacco industry, and for like a year, I was just knew everything about the tobacco industry and the history of the tobacco industry.
When you do something like that, it's easy to hate the tobacco industry, but as a writer, you have to make us care about that. And just using hate, that's probably too simple to do all the time. You want to try to create some kind of empathy, right? Like the
Yeah,
character from The Rock, the Colonel that Ed Harris plays. I can almost see his point, right? You've got to walk
yeah.
that line as an author.
Yeah, I think so. And there's definitely different styles. I mean, that was very much my style of writing, is everything was a little gray. It's a little more so in this one. There's kind of a surprise ending to this book that's
Good.
gotten a lot of debate, and some people loved it, some people hated it, but it's a little gray. And but that I think is the way the world is going, much more than, I mean, with terrorism, it's pretty easy. There's a black hat and a white hat there. It's a simple moral dilemma to solve. But with politics, particularly America's internal politics, I think everybody has a different view. I mean, they have a different view of China, of what Russia's doing, of Europe. So things have become very much about perspective, and that's an interesting change that I've seen in fans, and certainly have had to deal with the books.
Yeah, perspectives, white hat, gray hat, black hat. Like we got this story about, we're having the national conversation about domestic terrorism, what that looks like. And one of the people they used right now lately to advance that narrative, good or bad, is a guy who we find out his daughter was sexually assaulted in a bathroom by a male, and you're like, well, damn it. We can't get mad at that guy because we all don't want to be that guy. And we all completely empathize with this guy. And so we're really struggling to sort these things out. Does a guy like Mitch care about stuff like that? Or is he just so action focused? He's just good, bad guy, decide now, pull the trigger, move on.
He was like that. He's not as much like that now. But again, it's because of his life experience. When he was young and kind of angry, and straight up fighting terrorists, that was an easy thing for him to do. I mean, that's not that morally ambiguous. Plus, you're young, and you're not that your thinking maybe isn't as nuanced as it is as you get older and a little more reflective. Now, though, he's evolving. Particularly in this last book and the next book, you're going to see a guy who's thinking back on his career, thinking where America is now. What role he had in that, for better or for worse. And I think those are interesting things to tackle now because, you know, you have to reflect what's going on in the world to write an interesting thriller. So, for a while you had Cold War thrillers, people like Ludlum and Clancy, Le Carre, and then the wall fell and it moved on. And so you're always tracking what's happening currently to make it feel real. And, what's happening currently in the world is maybe more complicated than any time in history. Well, the Russians are our enemies, but they mostly are Facebook trolls. The Chinese are in a way competitors more than, I mean, they're not looking for world domination or anything. They just want to sell you a lot of cheap crap, make a
Yeah.
lot of money, maybe take Taiwan. But same thing, that maybe as oil kind of comes to a close, you're going to see a lot of changes in the Middle East. We pulled out of Iraq. Iran is constantly evolving. So the United States, really interesting, is on some course. I'm not quite sure what it is. So all these things, are, you can't just focus on the Soviet Union or, Al
Yeah.
Qaeda.
Well, you can't just focus on these monolithic bad guys. And in a lot of ways, I'm not a writer, but I write things, right? And so I've got a novella that I'm kind of pecking away at. And maybe I'll publish it one day. Maybe I won't. It doesn't really matter. But I really played with the idea of the democratization of war. And one of the things I struggle with, so anybody can acquire war machines now. Like you can fight via code or high explosive, whatever. And then to what point? Like, what's the point? Why would someone start these things? Ideology is one thing, but there's so much chaos in the world. It can almost be anything. It can be business related, kind of like, Die Hard, when it's just a heist, shrouded in terrorism. And so with this democratization of conflict, it seems like we're really in an area that it's a very dangerous time. And it's exceptionally hard to figure out what to do, but fantastic if you're a writer, I would submit.
Yeah, chaos isn't good. Conflict is good for writers, but chaos is weird. And
Mm.
I agree with you. You're saying exactly. I mean, the technology is putting incredible power into the hands of individuals, or small private groups, and that is something that is going to sort of plague humanity, I think, because there are some crazy people and crazy groups of people out there who have, I don't know, bizarre motivations.
Mhm.
So that's something, you're going to see, I think, coming out in thrillers, and hopefully not as much in real life, but I think it will. I mean, terrorism. I mean, look what Al Qaeda managed to do to America with, a few planes. And I'm not just talking about what happened on 9/11, but we're talking about, you know, probably two wars, transferring our entire system over to, anti-terrorism, trillions and trillions of dollars that could have been spent in other
Yeah.
ways. So I mean, it's very much a defining moment for us, and it was done by a small group of people with really no what box cutters, right? A few box cutters.
Box cutters and a desire to not land a plane. I mean,
Yeah.
it is doable, and there are a lot of things that are doable that would cause the equal kind of thing. We're not the same country we were 20 years ago. I would say we are in a worse. There's a lot of things that are better, but we're in a lot of ways in a significantly worse way. Just the other day, I had a guy on the show. We were talking about George Bush the younger's approval rating post 9/11. I mean, it was over 85%, and I don't know that we'll see that again anytime soon. And then whatever we have to go to get there, good grief. I mean, it took an enormous hit, but we were not nearly as divided as we are now as a nation.
Yeah, and that's something that you've got to deal with to some extent in books, but not so much that it becomes depressing. I mean, you want your books to be fun, too. So it's a yeah, it's a strange time. I don't know what's driven Americans apart like this. And I honestly kind of, I guess naively now thought that the pandemic was going to be the moment that we all pull together.
Yeah.
And because it's not political. A virus is just flat out not political. It's a threat equally to everybody, Democrat or Republican. I figured everybody, this would be that moment that everybody, really came together and said, we're going to fight this and we're going to beat this because we're America and that's what we do. And it very much has taken the opposite path, which is sort of unimaginable. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting thing to think about and to write about, like, where does that go? If we were attacked, I mean, if Russia attacked us, would half of us fight with Russia? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I mean, do you hate Republicans or Democrats more than you hate Vladimir Putin? Maybe. So
Maybe.
it's a strange, yeah, it's definitely a strange time to deal with.
The China thing, I wanted to get back to that because it's interesting. And again, as an author, you're playing with these subjects, but there's a lot of people in China, and they for sure go down, I guess what we would say is a totalitarian road, but they also have a middle class that's bigger than the entire population of the United States. And those folks want more stability, energy, comfort, not less. And so they've got to go find these resources because they don't have, and no country would have the resources to provide for 500 million or however big their middle class, billion people in their middle class, who knows? But it's a challenge to do that, and then to do that reliably. Like, you can't stretch your strategic assets so thin that, we'll say, Kenya decides, hey, deal's over. Now you have this conflict, and now you become a conflict-ridden. I mean, it's really, really hard for them to keep. And I think we all need China to be as stable as it can, but that's an impossible problem to do and have and come off looking like you're doing a good thing with it.
Yeah, and I think what you see with China is, they're going to turn to nationalism. The drug of the masses. They're gonna. I mean, it happens here too. It happens certainly in Russia, that the ruling class can kind of dope everybody with this stuff, get everybody fired up so that they ignore the fact that things aren't going well for them. And so I feel like China's sort of they're an interesting one because, they were a competitor for a long time, but now they seem to be becoming more of a dictatorship. And the purpose of China is to sort of worship one man. This stuff with Taiwan, you think China has so many problems keeping its hands around what it's got.
Yeah.
And they want to add more. Like, that's their main driver is getting more. And I feel like I'd try to get my arms around the massive land mass and cultural differences and stuff that they already have to deal with. So, but again, an interesting thing to write about, but not the same kind of threat of the Soviet Union, thinking, we want to take over the world. China's not, not really the same kind of an opponent.
One of the tools of drama that I find interesting is the attack on self to make the enemy of self look bad and bring resources and the things that self needs, so you kill a bunch of kids and of your own kids, and you point at the guy across the street and be like, those guys killed our kids. That's a powerful, what I'm talking about? And so,
yeah, sure.
I'm curious what you think about these different mechanisms to create drama and intrigue, because what a twist at the end, you find out, oh my God, they contrived this whole thing. And I had all this hatred towards this thing, but turns out I'm actually pissed off, when the protagonist becomes the antagonist,
Those are hard to write. That's kind of like unreliable narrators and stuff. So, yeah, I think I have an easier job with that because you have a long history of Mitch Rapp being the good guy. Having said that, like I said in this book, things get a little gray and people start turning on each other because, what's right and what's wrong in the United States anymore. It sort of seems to be dictated as, if you like, Donald Trump, anything he does is right, is by definition right. Same thing, Joe Biden. If you like Joe Biden, anything he does is right. And this kind of like heavy tribalism and leaving behind, it used to be you could write a bad guy or a good guy and define them by their actions. And that's why, for instance, and I still try to do that, but that's why I never mention Republican or Democrat, because, like, to be a little controversial, if I went back in time and told Vince in a few years, the Capitol is going to be, there's going to be an insurrection, people are going to storm the Capitol, a cop is going to be beat to death, he would have said, oh my God, that's horrible. And I would say, well, yeah, but about 30% of Americans might disagree with you. And he lived at a time, which is not very long ago, where that would have just been horrible. You could just put that out there, like you're saying, killing kids. Well, someday if killing kids is sort of a matter of perspective, well, it's only 5, kind of thing, right? I think Donald Trump, didn't he say something like, I could go out on Times Square and shoot somebody, it wouldn't change my numbers.
Yeah.
Right? And that's true now.
You got.
And so it's a very strange thing.
What if you told Robert Ludlum that Joe Biden and Donald Trump would both be president back to back? He'd probably lose his mind and be like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, well, yeah, seriously. You'd be like, Donald Trump, the casino guy?
Yeah. The whole thing is crazy. And the things that either one of those guys says, you look around and you're like, how did we get to this point? When you write a president, I've thought about this a long time. When you think about the qualities of a good president, right? Sometimes you want an outsider, sometimes you want an insider, and we kind of are okay with kind of banging around a little bit with as long as you stay within the limits. We seem to want to push the limit to the ship goes all the way to the edge of the Panama Canal and just drags its whole way down, and maybe tearing the ship apart as we do that. But we'll be damned if we're going to get anywhere near a middle on anything. And so we have this, these wild swings that don't seem sustainable. But as an author, if you were going to write a president, would you write someone that was that chaotic? That was that? I mean, like or love Joe Biden and Donald Trump, neither of these guys are people that I think we would ever want to pick. Be like, oh yeah, that guy's going to do a great job.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't. I mean, with Donald Trump, I mean, on paper, he would look very strange. Like, I mean, if you wrote a fiction, a piece, and you had somebody with his background, it would look a little strange. Right. So I don't know that anybody would take it really seriously. So, Biden's easier. I mean, he's been a politician since the dawn of time, right? So not really outrageous that one would expect a former vice president who'd been, in politics forever. So, but yeah, I guess there's this thirst for change. I think you have this kind of burn it down mentality on both ends of the spectrum. And I always wonder how many people it is. Is it 25% on the left and 25% on the right? If so, that's 50% of people who kind of want to burn it all down, but I've never heard any of them say what they kind of want to replace it with. So it's, before you burn your house down, you need to know where you're going to move.
No, I feel like somebody else's house down. It's okay.
Yeah, but now we've gotten to the point where we'll burn our own house down to, if we think it might, the flames might jump to our neighbor's roof. And that's a really bad place to be.
It sure is. Okay, let's get back to writing. You write for Robert Ludlum under his banner, under Vince Flynn's banner. Did you get a chance to meet Vince before he passed?
No, I didn't. Well, I think we met maybe briefly at I think it was in a conference.
Right.
I can't entirely remember, but it was a long, long time ago. He blurbed one of my books way back in the day. But no, I would have loved to have done this, but I honestly wasn't picked until after he had passed away.
And when you get that call, hey, you're going to write under the Vince Flynn banner, what is that? What is that moment like for you? I mean, I always laugh, like when Quincy Jones calls someone like, I need your help. You hang up the phone. You're like, that's not Quincy Jones. But then it is, because he calls back. He's like, no, it's really Quincy Jones. So when someone calls you and says, we want you to do this, I mean, this is an incredible gig for any writer anywhere,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely it is. And it's been a great job on pretty much every level. But I mean, when I was first offered it, it was something I had to think about. I mean, I'd been a successful writer. I'd been a New York Times bestseller and all this, but my career was very comfortable in that, it was kind of at a lower level. And then all of a sudden you think, well, now you're taking on the helm of one of the most popular series in the world, one of the best-selling series in the world. Sort of just the level of it was, a little intimidating. And then the question of, can you do it credibly? Because I certainly didn't want to fail. I mean, the spotlight's really on you at that point, particularly. And I didn't. So I had to go back and reread his last book, Vince's last book, and really think about where I would go with it and if I could do it. I mean, he and I didn't write alike particularly. I mean, I remember being really scared by his action sequences. Probably the longest one I'd ever written was 3 pages, and does it go on for 40? And I didn't even really know if I could do it. So I put a lot of thought into it before I considered accepting that job.
Since you took this job, there's been a whole lot of actual real life operators that have taken up thriller writing, and Jack Carr is going to be the one I'm going to use, but Andrews and Wilson, these guys are, military guys, but Jack Carr is an actual SEAL who takes a guy who trains SEALs how to do hand-to-hand combat. And he's like, act out this action scene for me and send me a video. He told me this on the show, and he's like, and then he puts his hand here and he would twist it. He would, and It's just incredible that we have these capabilities and a guy who's in the mindset of an actual operator. Is that intimidating for you?
No, it's not too bad. I mean, I love Jack's book, but I think with a book or even, you're making a movie or something, these are stories about people. And
Mhm.
if you can enhance that with a lot of research and do a great job with that, I think that's possible for a person like me. I think for Jack, it's just way, way easier. But I can think these things through, call experts and stuff like that, and make them very realistic. Still, I have to put a lot of effort into it. So,
Yeah.
um, I think I've always been a writer. I mean, I've written books that weren't thrillers really. And that's where my interest lies. Can I tell a great story about really cool characters that feel real to people, and
Mhm.
that have interesting plots and all these things, and then get the details right too. But my overarching uh, view is like that I want to write a really good book, um, and that's a pretty broad you know target.
Yeah. And then I want to ask you two parts of this, but let's first back up. When you take on the job of writing under another author's banner, I mean, it's incredible, right? Like you do hit a new level, but you also don't get to express yourself in book form as often as you might like to. And maybe you just like have no, I don't know if you don't have any time for it. I know that some authors take time to write their own stuff in addition, and it's part of their deal, but you're writing Vince Flynn books because that corporation wants you to turn out content because that's how they make their money. And you have a job to do that. So how do you balance your need to create for you versus, for the folks that you work for?
I think I think there's always a creative challenge to books. Like, so the first one was essentially to write a forgery, to write a book that no one would be able to tell Vince
Hmm.
didn't write. He had also written a few pages, and I wanted to put them in the book. I wanted them to blend really well. So that was an incredible creative challenge. Not only a creative challenge, that was a really big technical challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then as time goes by, I always find something interesting to challenge myself with every book. And the books have evolved to some extent away, it's sort of necessarily away from The Last Man, which is the last book that Vince wrote, because the world has changed. And, like we've been talking about, and Mitch is 7 years older. So a lot of things have happened to him in that time. So it's an interesting creative process to grow that character from where he was when I took him on.
It's one thing when Clancy dies because he's an older guy, and like I've read a lot of Clancy books, you know, back when he was writing them still. But I noticed I started to lose a love for his books because he was aging out of the genre. The way he wrote his characters, the things, just the language he used. They were too old and salty and navy, and they weren't hip. And it just they weren't. And when I say hip, I got to make sure I'm saying this correctly. They weren't speaking like people of the age that he was writing for. He was writing in an older man's voice for younger people. And it just, I was willing to make the leaps on Jack Ryan doing this and Jack Ryan doing that. But the secondary characters, I'm like, he's not nailing it. And so, and I'm not saying that was the case with Vince because Vince was way too young when we lost him. But did you feel like the voice needed tuning up at all? And do you even want to be critical of Vince in any way? You don't have to answer that if you don't want to.
Yeah, it's funny. Clancy, I remember he once had this young operator, and they were talking about, my mom made fun of him for this. So my parents were really good friends with Tom Clancy, and just by coincidence, kind of. And she was making fun of him because he had this young operator, and they were saying, "Who's like the hottest woman in the world?" And it was like Maureen O'Hara, and it was like I can't remember who the other one was.
And
And
Raquel
my mom was like, "For God's sake, Tom, like J Lo," and he said,
yeah.
"Who?"
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But so the answer to your question is no. I mean,
Okay.
Vince very unfortunately passed away kind of at the height of his powers. I mean, that was a guy who had a long time before he started. Well, before he said J Lo, and people were like, "Who?" Um, so no, I mean, he certainly died as one of the top thriller writers of his generation, and he was still on top of it. So I didn't. I mean, I went into it and I told his agent. His agent said, "What would you change about this?" I mean, time is going on. I was pretty much, my attitude was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
But I mean, it happens. It happens to us all. I mean, if I had to. The great thing is Mitch is about my age, so his attitudes are a little grumpy and old like mine. So I don't have to. But when I do write about things like people doing, his daughter doing Facebook or social media, so I probably dated myself by saying Facebook. I have to ask. I have to consult younger people and people who would know stuff like that, because even music. I mean, I don't know who a young kid would listen to today.
And then at some point, Mitch gets too old to operate, and
does he? I don't know.
Yeah, I know he gets too old, because I'm, I got broken body parts and my hips don't work the way they're supposed to. And yeah, look, you can have an old guy who goes out for one last thing, right? But then he's like, good God, never again. And then maybe he goes out one more time, but you can't, at some point, you can't operate like that. So you have to transition this to like the Sniper series. You have to go from, the dad to the son to the other person. You have to move the load around, because you just physically can't do that stuff. At some point, jumping out of an airplane is bad for you. Right. Or not. I don't know. I mean, it's your world. Do you just go back? I like the concept of the in-between cool, right? Where like, oh, you guys don't know about this story, but this happened back in 1972. And then you tell this side story, and there's a whole nother thing there. But how do you evolve the series and worry about the age of Mitch Rapp?
Boy, I don't know. That's such a big question. And it's one I wrestle with, I don't know, constantly. Are
you drinking wine?
By the way, it's not morning. I'm actually in Europe, so
you're good.
It's then 9:00 at night. But yes, I am. Yeah. So what do you do with Mitch? So Vince aged him normally.
Okay.
So every year he got 1 year older. He was roughly Vince's age, because Vince and I were almost exactly the same age. So I stopped that and have kind of been aging him at an incredibly slow rate, but maturing him as though he's been really aging. And it's a tough, it's tough, because, you don't want him to get old, because he's such an appealing character. There's so many fans of this character. They want to see him kicking ass and taking names. They don't want to see him become director of the CIA.
Right.
On the other hand, though, probably one of the hardest ones to deal with is essentially his girlfriend's daughter, which is sort of becoming his daughter, who's 6. And it's really obvious that she doesn't get older. I mean, because Mitch, he turns from 44 to 45, big deal. You don't really notice that, but the difference between 6 to 7 to 8 is big. So I'm trying to decide whether I should keep Mitch roughly the same, kind of like James Bond a little bit, but then have his daughter get older. And would that seem weird? I don't know. Like it's really interesting, because I was just watching a thing on the new James Bond. I haven't seen the movie, but they're wrestling with the same things. As James Bond become very archaic, and how do you continue that story and make it relevant today, and all these things. And those are the things you're constantly thinking about.
What about the stuff that doesn't apply to the story, but make the character more rich? For example, it drives me crazy if you're going to push me out into a combat zone and you're going to sweat me on the hours that I'm billing. And my meter is, am I working for you, or am I doing something for me? Right. And so if I'm in the gym working out, when I need to work, I need to be fit to do that. I'm billing the government for that. If there's a bombing and I have to go out to a bombshell and I'm standing there for 4 hours, I don't want to be there for that. I'm working. Right. So I bill for that. But you get sweated all the time on that stuff. Or like, hey, Pete, I need you to put in for this promotion, and you don't get it. You're like, what the F? Why did I do that? And then The one I love is you have to write like your own bonus thing, right, for the government. And so you're like, here are the things that I
Right.
did. You can't give yourself all gold stars because they won't accept that. And so I spent literally more time, my billable hours, on writing my I did great for the end of the year bonus thing than the actual amount of the bonus, right? So in effect, I not paid it. I just wrote it. And then my boss has to write it and he has to write one for everybody else. And then someone comes back and I'm deployed. I'm doing stuff. It's incredible. Someone who's never talked to me comes back and goes, yeah, not that great. My guy, Ricky, though, who works in the office next to me, he's the best. I would lose my mind over these things, right? And it wouldn't mess with my ability to do my job, but I would be pissed, and it would be the main conversation I'd be having while I was deployed because the government sucks at personnel stuff, especially when you're deployed.
Yeah, fortunately, Mitch works directly for the CIA director, and his guys work as consultants and kind of get all their stuff gets approved by her, which is, I think, probably a pretty good way to go. Plus, Mitch is pretty wealthy, so
Yeah.
he doesn't really do it for the money. Does he ever even get paid? I'm not 100% sure anymore.
Yeah, it's
He
like,
might just be doing this for free.
I'm going to go infiltrate this camp, but my direct deposit didn't go through. I'll be standing by. Let me know when the money's dropped. You know?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's he kind of does it for the love of the love of country, but it's getting, yeah, it gets harder. It gets harder.
Does Mitch vote?
That's an interesting question. Does Mitch vote? On one hand, I want to say he would because it's kind of your duty as a citizen, but on the other hand, he's super, he's not part of the political system. Like he's very much, keeps his distance from the political system. I'm going to say that Mitch does not vote because like it would in some way make him partisan, and he is not. He works for the president of the United States and the American people.
That is a very common thing. I had Alex Vindman on the show the other day, and we were talking about that. And I asked him that question because it's very common. It's not appropriate for me. When I was working with and in the military, I didn't vote because I'm not living in the place that I'm voting on measures and initiatives for. I'm not able to keep up with it like I'd want to. And I would never want to pick my boss in case it went for or against me because now I'm picking for a different reason. And so, I was there to serve at the pleasure of the president, no matter what it was, right? I was there to serve, the country. And so you don't get to pick. And so a lot of us don't vote, but some of us don't vote just because it's a pain in the ass. Like, oh, that's right.
Well, that is, yeah.
I'm in Syria. I got to go get my mail-in ballot done,
Right. Well, you make an interesting point, though. I mean, if you're not there, too, if it feels very different because it's harder to keep up and to know what's going on the ground. And it's funny. I talk to people. I live in Spain, and I talk to people at home, and get a very different perspective than I do just maybe watching the news or something. So it's kind of hard to say. And of course, Mitch is always running around the world, and he lives a lot of time in South Africa now. So.
Yeah. Well, you got to stay out of the States if you work overseas a lot because you give a lot of money back in taxes if you don't spend enough time away. Is there a book?
In the military.
Yeah. If you're military. Yeah. Is there a Kyle Mills book coming out soon?
No
time.
I can focus on one thing at a time. And I wish I was one of these guys. Some of these guys are amazing, and men and women that can do like 3 or 4 books in a year. And boy, if I can get one done, it's a miracle. And it's not even like I wish I could say that I was one of those cool kids. It's like, oh, I write it, start it 2 months before it's due and fire it off. But it's not true at all. I mean, I start my new one pretty much the day I finish my old one or the current one. And I work, straight through for the entire year. So I think I'm just a slow writer.
And what does your workday look like? Are you an iron butter who does 16 hours a day if needs be? Or do you kind of do, I know guys that do 4 hours. I do 4 and then I'm done and then I have to do other things.
Yeah, hopefully it's not. God, hopefully not 16. So I tend to set up how much I'm going to do in a day. How much I need. So
Mhm.
like a chapter would be an obvious day. I have to do one chapter a day. So if it's really short and easy, I might get away with 3 hours. If it's really long and hard, it might be more like 12. So it kind of depends. But so I don't divide my time based on time. I divide it on production. So whatever it is, a chapter a day or whatever I have to get done.
And then once you put down a chapter, how much does it evolve from the first pass to the publishable pass?
Kind of depends. I Not a ton. I think it just gets cleaned up normally. Probably the biggest thing that changes in my books is they get from first draft to second
Mhm.
would be they get much shorter. So
Mm.
my first drafts, I tend to write pretty flabby, I think. I'm not sure why. And then sometimes I'll cut whole entire chapters where I'll look at it and think, where did this go? Like, I'm not sure what I was getting at here. And,
Yeah.
maybe there's two sentences that are important and they can go somewhere else. So I'll cut. It's kind of heartbreaking. And I think the one thing weakness some authors have is once they've spent all that time working on something, they don't want to just chuck it in the garbage. For
Yeah.
some reason, I have a hard time doing that. So I'll cut, the equivalent of 5 or 6 chapters out of a book easily. The last book I wrote, I cut maybe 12.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was, and I don't write, that's not that many chapters. So maybe I started with 62 and it went to
Wow.
50. So, like, it was a large percentage of the book went in the garbage because it didn't work or it didn't, wasn't tight. I like writing really tight books that don't have a lot of yada, yada, yada.
And then do you do something with those things? Like, is there a Word document that you just never open, but you know it's there, so it feels better?
I do. I have a thing like it's a file called tabled,
Uh huh.
and it's just but it's almost I never open it
Right.
because it's depressingly huge. Like it'll be like 40,000 words, and I think, oh my god,
Yeah.
that's half a novel
Right.
that I just chucked. So yeah, I do. I save them, and I don't know, but I never want to look at them again because
Yeah.
it's
I
just
have.
too
That's
depressing.
again. I'm not a writer like you at all, but when I write things, and I write a lot about being deployed and what that's like, either in terms of fiction or actual, like this is how this stuff works. And a lot of it doesn't make it in, but it's good, and it might come into play somewhere else. But I never look at that document again. And there's enough stuff in here that I can just push it back out, and maybe it's stored somewhere in the ether in my brain, and it gets reconverted and pushed out into this time. But yeah, I mean, I do, but I also know authors that are like, there's so many ideas, I don't ever worry about it, and they don't have that mindset of, man, I really love this, but I can't use it, but I'm going to keep it. They keep it clean and just know something else is there.
Yeah, I know. There aren't that many. I envy them. I don't find that good ideas are that easy to come by. So I would never discard one. I have a
Yeah.
different file for that. Tabled is just crap, and
Uh-huh.
I have another file that's like ideas, and that is where all these little. Sometimes they're just little things, though. I mean, it's not any like an article you read, and you want to link to it, and you want to keep it because it's a cool weapon or a tactic or some something going on in Iran or something like that, which um, you never thought about. So
Yeah.
those things are those things. It's nice to be able to dive back into that when you're going to do a new book and have something to look at as opposed to just this dead blank page.
There's also those things that you see in your day-to-day life. You go to the train station, in Sevilla or wherever you're at, and you're like, man, that sandwich looks wonderful. I bet Mitch would see that sandwich and think about it when he's, been up for 36 straight hours, hasn't eaten a thing. He's like, I can't wait to get back to Sevilla and buy that sandwich, those kind of things. How much of that day-to-day life stuff blends in?
A lot. I mean, I get that all the time. People I meet that I think that guy would be a good character, that woman would be great in this situation. Um, Certainly places and settings. I go to almost all the places I write about.
Yeah.
So I learn a ton about those, the smells and, the sights and things that you had no idea about. So, and weird little tidbits that you'd never think about. I mean, in Turkey, for instance, when it rains, the roads get really slick. And I mean ridiculously slick, like ice. And I like never would have known that if I hadn't been there. And you think about in an op, or like there was a car chase and it started to rain, it would be like a car chase going 4 miles an hour. Otherwise, you just like, oh, you'd be off into a building. So those are fun little tidbits to throw in there that you know if you've been there. But now, obviously, I have a lot of luxury. I wasn't able to do that with my first book, certainly, but now I have the luxury to do it because it's what I do for a living.
And if your creative brain is saying, okay, Mitch is going to have to go to Tokmak, Kyrgyzstan, or somewhere like that, you know, off the map somewhere, are you like, how about I'd rather go to Tbilisi, and so let's have them go. I'd rather go to Georgia.
Well, there is that, yeah. Like
Okay.
I'd love to go to Iran. It's really
Right.
one of my, it's super high on my list to go to Tehran. But I've said so many mean things about them in my books that I feel like I probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I had really, you know, there are definitely some places I had all really wanted to go to the Soviet Union.
Mhm.
And my father and we worked so hard to get there, and it would have been okay. They were going to let us, but the U.S. government did not want him to go because he was a diplomat and an FBI agent. And so it became such a quagmire that I never got to go. And I thought, well, I'll have plenty of time. And same thing with Syria. I had a trip, all this amazing trip to drive across Syria. And I thought but I didn't do it because I got busy. And then thinking, well, Syria is the most stable country in the, you know, in the whole Middle East. This is going to be fine.
Yeah.
Blew it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
do what you want to do when you want to do it. Don't put it off.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe you can do the Iran thing by you know, some guy out of the cold calls Mitch and is like, hey, I'm in Iran, but I got a proposition for you. You know, we can work on something, and you can do something that's pro Iran a little bit. You know,
Maybe. I mean, that's such an interesting country, and it just burns me up that I don't feel comfortable. I should send my wife, since she's never done anything to the Iranians, and have her report back to me. But yeah, there's a number of places that I've always wanted to go, and I haven't quite made it to yet. So
yeah.
they'll always show up in a book.
Yeah. The thing with Iran is when they arrest you, you're a spy automatically, no matter what happens. We had Michael White, the guy that was arrested and held there for a long time. We had him on the show, and you know, it's not worth the risk. Or go to the Kurdistan part of it, you know, and then just tell a story about that part, because you'd probably be safe up there. But yeah,
Kyrgyzstan too. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of interesting places to go.
Yeah, for sure. So for everybody who's listening, you know, the book is called Enemy at the Gates, and it's another of the Vince Flynn series with the Mitch Rapp character. If you guys like action adventure, if you guys haven't heard of Vince Flynn, gosh, read a book. Either way, and that's what Kyle does. He writes books for that banner. Are you going to write any more Robert Ludlum books, or are you guys done with that contract?
No, I don't think so. No, that's been a while now. So I think they've moved on.
Why do you think a powerful brand like Stephen J. Cannell doesn't have someone doing the same thing for them?
You know, it's just like a question of whether the family wants it to continue or not. And, you know, that's a really kind of personal decision as to whether that's something maybe the author would have wanted, whether there's something more to say, with that character has something more to say, whether there's a lot of fans that want to continued. But yeah, it's interesting how some do, and you know, maybe some don't, and some would be hard, like Stephen King. You know, I'm not sure that he'd be a hard guy to just fill in for because of his bizarre, you know, sort of imagination. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, either way, everybody look at the on the screen. You can see the link to Enemy at the Gates. It'll also be in the show notes. It's in the YouTube notes. So wherever you go and you look at it, you'll see it there. Click and subscribe, of course. That's always helpful. Anything in closing at all, Kyle?
No. Well, thanks to all of Vince's fans for, you know, accepting me so warmly, and I'm really happy to hear that everybody seems to like the book. So that's all I can ask for.
That's enough. Stand by. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.